Good morning and welcome to EHS Today's webcast, Home Office Safety for Remote Workers, sponsored by Skillsoft. My name is Adrienne Selko and I'm the Senior Editor of EHS Today. Before we begin, let me explain how you can participate in today's presentation. First, if at any time you are having audio difficulties or slides are not advancing, simply hit the F5 key to refresh your webcast console. If you have any technical difficulties during today's session, please press the Help button on your player console to receive assistance in solving common issues. This webinar technology allows you to resize the presentation by clicking the Maximize icon or by dragging the lower right corner to enlarge the window. We welcome your questions during today's event. To submit your questions, simply type them into the Q&A window on the left side of your screen and hit the Submit button. We'll be answering as many questions as possible during the Q&A session that will follow the main presentation, but feel free to send your questions in at any time. Please also be aware today's session is being recorded and will be available on the EHS Today website within the next week for you to review. You will be notified by email when the archive is available. The Skillsoft logo on your console is hot linked. If you want to visit the website during the webcast, you can click on the logo and a new window will open. It will not take you out of the webinar. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter. We have with us today Donna McEntee, the Workplace Safety and Health Solution Director at Skillsoft. Donna manages Skillsoft's global library of more than 800 workplace EHS safety courses, and she works with Skillsoft stakeholders and customers to design effective compliance training programs. With more than 25 years of experience in adult learning and education, she provides subject matter support for workplace safety, health, environmental, and transportation regulations and best practices. Welcome, Donna. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Adrienne. I really appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy days to join our webinar. Really, the focus of today's webinar is going to be on home office safety for remote workers. In the wake of the global pandemic and shifting employer-employee work arrangements, more employees than ever are working from home or being given that as an option. But injuries still occur in the home just like they do in the workplace. As a result of these new work environments, I thought it would be helpful to explore OSHA's perspective for home offices and the work-relatedness of injuries, to look at how to identify and reduce ergonomic hazards in a home office environment. We're also going to look at and identify common hazards and prevent accidents in the home office workspace. And we want to ensure that your organization's EHS policies are clearly communicated, understood, and implemented consistently among your employees. And then finally look at and identify safety training requirements and ways that you might track employee participation. So first, let's go ahead and take a minute to answer a poll question. What percentage of your employees transitioned to working remotely as a result of COVID-19 this year? 0 to 10%, 10 to 25, 25 to 50, 50 to 75, or 75 to 100%. You can go ahead and select your answer and submit it. Okay, so this is very interesting. I was doing some research, and in June, the Bureau of Labor Standards had a post that indicated that about 45% of U.S. employment is in occupations where telework is feasible. However, a much lower percentage of workers actually work at home prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. It was somewhere in the 9 to 10% range. But that the percentage of workers where occupations where it's technologically feasible and could actually work at home really was pretty low. According to the BLS data, only 25% of workers were working from home after March per their data, which I thought was interesting. So I did a little more digging, and Stanford University had done a survey in June, and they reported that 42% of employees were working from home, and that many plan to remain at home. So your data is fairly consistent. It's interesting that 75 to 100% in some instances were working from home. So I think it's going to be a great topic to explore, what the home office safety issues are. And as an ES&H professional, the extent to which these working patterns are going to be permanently affected by the pandemic is really an open question. So we can speculate that the take-up rate will increase significantly, or in some cases permanently, as workers and employers become more comfortable with these telework arrangements. So what's the current situation for home office safety? Really, every year, thousands of Americans are involved in on-the-job accidents. Some are fatal, others result in lifelong adverse effects. So employers must enable their employees to work safely. With many employees spending their workdays in these home office environments, that means office safety is a big concern. And from an ergonomics perspective, we are 7 months into sitting on our couches, at the kitchen table, or any other available location in our home offices for remote work locations. We're using laptops, tablets, and smartphones to complete our daily tasks. I don't know about you guys, but, stiff shoulders, necks, sore wrists are probably, much more prevalent now than they have been in the past. I think most of us thought these would be temporary working conditions, but, working at home for a few months at the most, but now many employees may never go back into offices or may work in some type of a hybrid approach, at home some and in the office some. So given that, what we need to start with is really OSHA's perspective. And historically, OSHA has offered differing guidance regarding telework or remote work for employees. There was a 2009 interpretation that OSHA had shared that injuries and illnesses that occur while an employee is working at home, including work in a home office, should be considered work-related if the injury or illness occurs while the employee is working for pay or compensation at home. And the example that was shared was an employee drops a box of work documents and injures their foot, the case should be considered work-related. If an employee is injured because they trip on the family dog while rushing to answer a work phone call, the case would not be considered work-related. So there's this concept of work-relatedness as it relates to the injury. If an employee is working from home and is electrocuted because of faulty wiring, then that injury would not be considered work-related. In November, to go back just a little bit further, in November 1999, there was an interpretation letter that was published that caused widespread confusion and real unintended consequences. And I'm going to give you some background on it, but just know that OSHA withdrew this letter in January of 2000, so it was a very temporary interpretation that was available. OSHA was asked what the employer's obligation was within the remote work environment. And the example used was placing sales executives in a home office with a single room, desk, chair, file cabinet, business telephone, desktop or laptop computer, printer, and a fax machine. So those are pretty detailed specification of the work environment. OSHA's response that they shared was that the OSHA Act applies to work performed by an employee in any workplace within the United States, including a workplace located in the employer's home. All employers, including those who have entered into work-at-home arrangements with employees responsible for complying with the OSHA Act and safety and health standards. So even when the workplace is in a designated area in the employee's home, the employer retains some degree of control over the work conditions of the work-from-home agreement. An important factor in developing these arrangements is to ensure that employees are not exposed to reasonably foreseeable hazards created by their work-from-home employment. And really, ensuring safe and healthy work conditions for the employees should be a precondition for any home-based work assignments. So OSHA went into a great bit of detail about these types of arrangements and said that employers should exercise reasonable diligence to identify in advance the possible hazards associated with particular remote work assignments. And it's quite detailed, and it goes on and it talks about, some of the other standards that might pertain to specific work-at-home arrangements like ladders, compressed gas cylinders, electricity, mechanical, power press equipment, which is really outside of what we're talking about today as far as general home office work. Nevertheless, if employer of a home-based employee is aware of safety and health hazards or has reason to be, then the OSHA Act requires the employee to pursue all feasible steps. So as you can see, that last statement caused a significant amount of concern for both employers and employees. There was the question of, whether the employer could come in and conduct periodic safety checks in the house, and OSHA's perspective was, yeah, they could. So based on the interpretation that was published and the confusion that it caused, and depending on what type of business was being conducted at home, OSHA ended up withdrawing the interpretation in 2000. So that interpretation is no longer on file. But as you can see, OSHA's perspective has been as an employer, you have certain obligations to ensure that your employees can work safely, no matter where they are working. So where do we stand today on this? The current perspective is from the OSHA, from the 2000 compliance directive. There were two definitions that were added. One was for home-based work site and one was for a home office. So a home-based work site was the area in the employee residence where the employee performs the work for the employer. And the home office means home office work activities like filing, keyboarding, computer research, reading, writing, activities that included office equipment. Additionally, OSHA shared that the Department of Labor strongly supports telecommuting and telework. Family-friendly, flexible, and fair work arrangements, including telecommuting, can benefit individual employees and their families, employers, and society as a whole. So as we know, the purpose of the OSHA Act is to assure, so far as possible, every working man and woman in the nation a safe and healthful work condition. Employers are to provide employment in a place of employment that is free from recognized serious hazards and to comply with OSHA standards and regulations. OSHA also shared that they respect the privacy of the home and, to my knowledge, has never conducted an inspection of an employee's home office. So OSHA's intent is not to come inspect employees' home offices, but they want employers to ensure safe and healthful working conditions. So based on that, let's do another poll. Do you agree with the following statement? As an employer, I feel like I have little or no control over an employee's home office environment. And if you can, just take a second to respond, selecting the term that most closely that you most closely agree with on that. Okay, let's look at the results. As an employer, I feel like I have little or no control over an employee's home office environment. Strongly agree, agree, neutral, disagree. So I would say the percentage are in the strongly agree and agree area. As safety professionals, I know you're concerned with workplace safety and you feel like you do not have control over the employee's home office and remote work environments. I agree with that as well. There's some challenges there. Employees also have increased challenges and risks when working from home. If they're injured, it may be difficult to prove that an injury was work-related because there's usually less evidence available in a home office scenario. And remote work employees are often all by themselves as they work. If an injury were to occur, there's often no one present to corroborate the accident or determine what happened. So as an employer, from a legal perspective, if we look at liability and responsibilities, as a general employee, when an employee deviates from performing their job for a personal benefit, and then an injury occurs, it's usually not considered within the course or scope of employment. So it's not covered. But once an employee returns to the workplace, to the course of employment, and then an injury occurs, it's covered from that point on. So is a trip or fall while walking to the refrigerator for lunch when working at home considered in course and scope? Well, in one example from 2006, I can advance the slide here. An employee was working remotely at home when she fell down the stairs to her home office. and injured her neck. She was working from her basement, left the basement to go upstairs to the kitchen to get a drink. When she returned in a hurry to answer a ringing telephone, she fell down the stairs in the process. She filed a claim insisting that she was furthering her employer's business interest at the time by trying to answer the ringing phone, but was doing so while returning from getting a drink. The employer argued that she was not in the course and scope because she had gone upstairs to get a drink. In this case, the court determined that the employee was working at her home office, which was a fixed location, and we talked about the definitions that OSHA had provided in the APL, and that was approved by the employer as her work premises. The employer had argued that she had left her work location to go upstairs, but the court disagreed and confirmed that she was at her work location when she was injured. And let me go ahead and share another example. Another case is the Collins versus workers' comp. A worker was injured when she fell in a hole on the sidewalk while on lunch break 2 blocks from her home office location. She was not working at the time. Therefore, her injury was not compensable. It was not considered work-related. One other example is an employee tripped over her dog during working out while reaching for a cup of coffee in her kitchen and filed a workers' compensation claim. The judge determined that the injury was compensable, concluding that the work-from-home arrangement meant that the employer imported the work environment into the claimant's home and the claimant's home into the work environment. The finding was appealed, and the court said that the relevant risk was that the employee might trip over her dog while reaching for a cup of coffee in her kitchen. That risk exists whether the employee is at home working or whether she is at home not working. It existed before she took the home office job, and it will exist after her employment ends, so long as she maintains a home with a dog. Because the risk did not arise out of employment, the court determined that her injury in this case was not in the course and scope of employment. So you can see, based on these couple of cases, each possibility for injury is going to depend on the situation where the employee is working. But in some cases, working from home injuries will definitely be considered work-related or have a work-relatedness based on the circumstances. So based on that, we really should spend some time focusing on, how employees can work more safely in their home office workplace. So really, our home office is dangerous. In a recent Forbes article, it was shared that while employees regularly receive occupational safety training, most office workers have no idea how many hundreds of hours and millions of dollars were invested into making their office environments OSHA compliant. As employers, you've invested significant time and resources to selecting desks and monitors and adjustable chairs. You've given employees task lighting and light bulbs to make their work environment safer, ensuring that electrical outlets support the devices that are used. Now, employees have moved to their home offices. They have become responsible for their office designs. Have the employees given any thought to their workstations? Or are they sitting on the floor, couches, at the kitchen table? Or are they more concerned with how their office looks on a Zoom meeting than whether their monitor is at a correct height or their chair is adjusted to prevent their backaches? As we've discussed, OSHA won't hold employers liable for employees' home offices in the sense that they won't come in and do an inspection. They don't expect employers to do that. However, there are steps you can take to protect your employees that are working from home. So let's take a second and answer another poll question. Have you had your employees conduct a home office ergonomic self-assessment? To start with home office ergonomics first. And this would be where you've, asked them to have the correct furniture, correct setup, if they're having any issues, with how they're working from home. Okay, let's go ahead and look at those results. Okay, so pretty significantly, you've not taken the opportunity to do an ergonomic self-assessment with your home-based employees yet. And why should we care about ergonomics? I think even though MSDs, musculoskeletal disorders, tend to be gradual, or chronic injuries, it's really essential to work safely every day and to prevent the development of these types of injuries. While there are no federal standards for ergonomics, OSHA has covered ergonomics in the workplace under Section 5A1, the General Duty Clause, which requires employers to provide a work environment free from recognized hazards. Developing a program to keep your employees healthy, productive, and motivated while making working life as enjoyable as possible is really the right thing to do. And as employers, you can express your commitment in a variety of ways. For example, you could hold virtual meetings to discuss ergonomic issues with your employees and set specific ergonomic goals and priorities that are firm, achievable, and in line with your productivity and quality initiatives. Employees must recognize the signs and symptoms of MSDs. You can encourage the employees to take frequent breaks. One suggestion is every 30 minutes is a good guideline, and that helps employees be healthy and minimize injuries to the back, shoulders, and arms. One thing I've noticed, working from home through the pandemic is I take fewer breaks than I used to. It seems like, you put yourself in your chair first thing in the morning, and you're lucky if you take a break by lunchtime. So, your employees at home are doing the same thing. So really encouraging them and letting them know that it's okay to take breaks. They need to get up and move around. Another thing is maybe encouraging them to not sit all day or stand all day. I know some people like to use the standing desks now or would prefer to stand as they work. But it would be a good idea to alter the approach and ask them to change positions throughout the day. So then that brings us to the question is, do your employees have the equipment they need at home? And doing an assessment might be one way to determine, do they have the appropriate equipment? Did you let your employees bring their monitors, chairs, and other equipment home with them? If we think about laptops, they were originally designed to be used in the short term, typically while traveling. Now they're being used 8 or more hours a day. The same thing with tablets. And for employees like sitting at a kitchen table and working, the monitor and the keyboards on laptops aren't at the correct height. So do employees need an external monitor? Do they need an external keyboard? Are they using a mouse? So consider, doing the ergonomic assessment and just to survey employees. And there's some suggestions on types of questions. We're going to provide an ergonomics assessment checklist after the webinar so you can use it as a basis for your employees. And it goes through everything from the monitors to the chairs to the keyboard height. Find out what equipment your employees need. Do they need a speaker, a headset for their phone? Do they need an external monitor? Do they need external keyboard? So those are just a few suggestions on that. By sending out a survey form with the option for employees to provide a picture of their work area that you can evaluate, one study conducted by the University of Cincinnati, ergonomic evaluations of home workstations identified many issues affecting the workers. Chairs were the wrong height, 41% were too low, 2% too high, 53% of the workers had armrests on their chairs, but 32% didn't use them. So really doing that assessment, working with someone who's had training in ergonomics assessments in your organization to help employees would be another suggestion. So that would be one place to start. I'll come back to this poll in just a second. To do the assessments, you need to evaluate whether the monitors are positioned correctly. And not all adjustments for the monitors and keyboards need to be expensive. I've heard suggestions where employees are using pillows to raise their seat height. They can use rolled up towels to provide lumbar support. That could also be used to raise the height of the armchairs where they're working. So those are just a couple of suggestions. And then if you are encouraging your employees to switch from standing and sitting, you can use many objects around the house to alternate the workplace. For example, a kitchen bar could be used for the laptop to raise it for a standing desk, a large box, or a laundry basket flipped over. You could put the laptop on that to create an elevated workspace. So those are just a couple of suggestions. And then directly related to computer ergonomics and workstations, I just want to mention eye strain. Eye strain is a common hazard in an office environment, so proper lighting can significantly reduce eye strain. So make sure that's part of your assessment with your employees is, do they feel like they're experiencing eye strain? Do they have efficient, lighting in their workspace? Do they need task lighting, based on where they are working? Do they have light sources, that should be removed or shielded? When I first set up my home office, I had a window behind me, and that put a significant glare on the monitor. So I had to reconfigure my workspace so I didn't have that glare on the monitor all day. So work with them on identifying some positions that work best for them to that they can clearly see their monitor, it's positioned at the right height for them. Okay. And I'm going to go back and let's go ahead and do this assessment. This is for hazards. So have you had the employees conduct home office hazards assessments? And this would be for other types of hazards in their work environment. And if you can take a second and answer that question. So we're going to be thinking about, electrical, fires, slips, trips, and falls. So have you had them conduct other types of assessments? Okay. And yeah, pretty much the same response. So this is another one, again, OSHA says, if there are hazards in the workplace, employees need to be aware of them, trained on them, and, the hazards can be corrected where possible. So when we talk about workplace hazards and hazard prevention, one thing you might consider doing is just a simple hazard analysis with your employees. So it could be just a questionnaire or sheet that they can fill out. In addition to the computer equipment, you can talk about, the other types of hazards that might be in their house. For example, electrical, overloaded circuits, or fire safety. And, following a basic job hazard analysis format, you can ask them to break their job down into steps, identify the different hazards that might be present for each step, evaluate the hazards, and then recommend safety procedures and protection or ways to eliminate the hazard, and then ask them to periodically review and update those hazard analysis. And OSHA has a sample format for conducting hazard analysis available on OSHA.gov, and that would be a great place to start. And really the focus of doing the hazard analysis is, first of all, the elimination of the hazard, and that's the best type of control you can put in place. So, for example, if they have trip hazards, asking them to keep cords out of the way, and we'll talk some more about this, or objects in the floor. If you have kids and you're working from home, there may be toys on the floor. So we'll look at that in a little bit more detail. The next would be substitution. Can you replace the hazard with a non-hazardous object, device, or substance? Engineering controls. Are there changes to the equipment that you can put in place to eliminate the hazard for that employee? Administrative controls. Those are the process and policy changes that impact the way that your employees work. For example, suggesting breaks every 30 minutes or every hour to take a break from the equipment, from the laptops and the keyboards. And then finally, PPE. Which, in the home office environment, PPE is probably not going to be a solution for many of the hazards. And then if we look at another question from the start of the pandemic, have you provided additional training on home office safety to your employees? Could be online courses, written materials, copies of policies and procedures. And if you can, just take a second. And really this goes to, how well informed are the employees? Do they understand, what the expectations are around working from home? What can they do to be safer? Great. I'm glad to see that. So additional training is a great way to help ensure that the employees are working more safely. And some of the most common injuries when working from home, in addition to the computer ergonomics issues, back injuries. You want to encourage your employees to always use proper lifting techniques. And, the focus should be on how do you lift an object and, provide them instruction on the proper posture, evaluating the size and weight of the object, the path that they're going to travel, where do they plan on putting that object down, getting them to use, the proper technique, not bending over, lifting with their knees, keeping their feet flat on the floor. Even just little short 5-minute information bites on specific hazards like back injuries could go a long way to ensure that the employees are working safely. Another hazard that's common in home office environments is electrical safety. How many of us have power strips that are just absolutely loaded at this point? You're working in a spare space and there, aren't enough plugs, so you've put in multiple power strips to accommodate all of your electronics. But electricity can be a serious hazard. Home office workers can be injured in electrical accidents. And two factors that are most common for electrical injuries are really unsafe conditions, such as faulty wiring and equipment, and unsafe acts, such as, ignoring or maybe circumventing safety systems. So educating employees on basic safety practices with electricity will help reduce those risks from both factors. I would encourage employees to look around their home office environment for equipment. The cords may be frayed, pinched, maybe twisted cords or damaged wiring. Ask them to remove them from use immediately. If a device has a 3-prong plug, make sure that they know only to connect it to a 3-prong grounded outlet or an extension cord. Remind them to always match the plugs and outlets and don't use adapters that could interrupt the grounding connection. A lot of people don't know why that's there and why it's important to use those. Really that's there to keep them safe. And encourage them to avoid hazardous habits around electricity, such as, plugging something, don't pull the cord, use the plug to unplug it, always pull gently on the plugs, don't use wet hands. Some of these are just common sense, but having those reminders for the employees could go a long way in preventing accidents. And the next one is fire safety. So in the United States, a home fire occurs every 93 seconds. That's from the NFPA. Electrical malfunctions are the leading cause of home fires, and again, that results from problems in wiring, lighting, devices such as the appliances that they're using. As we're moving into cold weather, employees may be using heat units, such as ceramic heaters, electric, little space heaters, and the office equipment that they use. So encourage your employees to follow, electrical safety guidelines and avoid overloading circuits. Also, following good housekeeping practices in the home office will be important. Encourage them to make sure that materials such as paper, furniture, draperies are kept away from ignition sources like fireplaces, space heaters, candles. Everything that can burn needs to be kept, at least 3 feet away from any type of heating equipment. Also, according to the NFA, unattended cooking was the leading cause of home fires with casualties. And I thought this was a very interesting statistic. There have been more fires this year between the hours of 8 and 5 than there ever have been before. And that's really because of the people staying home through the pandemic or now working from home are also cooking more meals at home. And they tend to be distracted from, what the tasks they're doing. How many of us have started maybe cooking lunch and gone to answer a phone call and forgotten that we had left something on the stove or in the oven? So encouraging, employees to only cook when they can do so without becoming distraction. And that would be a great way to, possibly prevent home fires. And ask them to check smoke detectors. You could send out a monthly newsletter, with a reminder or a monthly reminder email that says check your, time to check your smoke detectors. Make sure the batteries are replaced. And we've got the time changes coming up, and that's always a great time to remind employees to check smoke detectors. encourage them to keep a fire extinguisher, working fire extinguisher in the home. And another important point is have an escape plan. You know, what if a fire does break out in the employee's home? Do they have a clear, you know, walkways, exits are clear, and do they have an escape plan that they can share with their families that they're also sharing their space with? So those are just a few tips for fire safety for the employees. Falls in the home office, you know, happen just like anywhere else in the workplace. So they are a serious safety risk and can lead to injuries and even death. Many falls are preventable. So let's consider some of the best practices and share those with the employees. And it could be as simple as wearing shoes in the home or anti-slip socks. I know I would prefer not to have shoes on in the home, so having anti-slip socks on my hardwood floors is a good idea. You know, they can tend to be slippery. Keep the objects around your workspace. Keep the floor clear around your workspace, and that could reduce trips over materials. A friend of mine had an incident where they tripped over their dog. Thank goodness they weren't hurt, but, you know, they both came crashing down. So being aware of that. Encourage employees, you know, to not be distracted. Talking and walking at the same time, you know, can be a challenge. If you're on your cell phone and not paying attention to the direction you're going, you could trip over something on the floor, trip over a cord, or maybe there's, you know, a spill on the floor. So just, you know, being aware of that being a hazard and some of the safe practices would be good to share with the employees. And then finally, as far as sort of the hazards, I think it's important to encourage, provide employees the safety and health representative contact information if they do have questions about ergonomics or other home safety hazards. And it's also important, you know, to know who they should contact if they do have an accident or an incident in their home. You as an organization would want to know this information, and the employee, you know, make it easy for them to report anything and whom they should report it to, and maybe even have an accident report format that you would want them to file. Could be via email or maybe an online web form. So something just to, you know, keep as a consideration. Okay, so your next steps, you know, when you're evaluating home office safety for your employees, I would really encourage you to go ahead and conduct assessments. So we're going to provide you with the computer ergonomics assessment form, and there are, you know, sample forms that you can use on OSHA's website. And I know several of the plan states have also have forms that would be available to do assessments of other types of hazards in the home office workplace. And then as you're developing your EHS policies for home office workers, you know, once you've determined, you know, what those policies are, ensure those are clearly communicated to the employees and understood. With everybody working from home, consider, you know, some of an electronic distribution system where the employees can sign off or attest that they've read and understood the information that's communicated, so that you can keep that from a record-keeping standpoint. And then also, once the hazard assessments have been conducted, determine what type of training would need to be conducted. You know, you may want to start with basic ergonomics training. You may want to do some home office safety training on fires, electrical slips, trips, and falls. Those types of, you know, general topics that all employees would benefit from, and make those assignments to the employees and track that they've completed. It could be done as web-based courses. They could be done as online team meetings, you know, just as a couple of examples of ways to do that information. But really, it's important to, you know, track that it's been assigned from a regulatory standpoint. You know, if somebody were injured, it would be good to be able to show that, yes, you had, you know, assigned training to the employee, they had completed it, when did they complete it, what did it cover. So having all that information documented as part of your training plan. And then if there's any, you know, special considerations around PPE or safety protocols for your employees, I think we're talking in general terms about home office safety today. But if you are, you know, asking your employees to do other types of work at home, it would be important to document that as well. And another consideration is addressing the potential language barriers among your employees. OSHA said, you know, you need to provide training and information in a language your employees understand. So if Spanish is a better language to provide training and documentation in, please make that a consideration. And that's just one example. And then work with your HR partner on policies such as, workers' compensation, those injury reports, if employees need modified work duties at home, creating those assessment forms. I also want to mention, I had mentioned briefly that if you wanted to do a virtual assessment with an employee, make sure you get permission from the employee first, that you are inspecting their workplace. And it could be just an email saying the employee gives you permission to do this. I think that's just good practice, be respectful of their privacy in the home. But also, if they need help evaluating their workspace, I think it would be good to get, some type of permission from them in writing that you're going to be, assessing their workplace virtually. So those are just a few suggestions for that. And finally, like dispersing information, we've talked about collecting all this information. Think about how you're going to get information into the employee's hands. If you do have a policy that needs to be read and understood by the employees, how are you going to be able to assign that, track it, make sure it's been read? If there's any actions that needed to be recorded, make sure those are documented as well. Think about scored examinations for the training that you do and being able to collect that information. You want to be able to assess the employee's knowledge. Also, questionnaires. How is that information going to get to the employees? Skillsoft has a product called Certitude that's used for creating questionnaires and pushing those out. I know there's other products in the in the space that do similar things, but that can be tied to training as well. And surveys. Maybe you need to ask just general surveys for the, assessment part. Or, think about, maybe doing a general mental health survey. Mental health of employees working from home is also very important. It might be good to give them some guidance on, if you, as employees, if they feel like they're having, challenges working at home and, people have been referring to it as COVID fatigue. Maybe do a survey on how their mental health is. Do they need assistance? Do they have any concerns? Work with HR on the types of questions that you would pose, and then how you would collect those responses as well. And then custom training. In addition to off-the-shelf training that may be available, you may want to consider developing some custom training around your specific work-from-home policies. So that's another way to get engagement and information from the employee. So those are just a couple suggestions around the information side. And really, that is, so that's where, I'm going to stop there for now. And if you have any questions, I think they've been collecting some questions in the chat box.
Yes,
so, Adrienne, are you going to queue those up? Okay.
Yes, we are. And first, I want to thank you for a great presentation. I'm sitting here looking at my home office, thinking of all the things I need to be doing. As we're doing the questions, I'd like to ask our audience to please take a moment and complete the feedback form that's on the left side of your screen. All right, the first question is a little long, so I'll read it. I can repeat it if you want. Most employers are not safety experts any more than they are IT experts. If training is not provided or complete to allow employees to be self-sustaining, would a safety help desk arrangement meet employers' obligations from a legal perspective?
By a safety health desk, I think I would probably need more information to answer that, but to have a contact person for the employees where they can reach out for questions around health and safety. It sounds
like that, yeah, just like you have an IT help desk if you're working at home. Yeah. I've never heard of that concept. Oh. It's interesting.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, because you think about it, from an office environment, you typically have somebody designated for safety and health responsibility, and they're in the office or at least accessible. So to do something like that in a virtual environment, I think I would remind people that it's also important from an OSHA perspective, to do the assessment part of it. To ensure that you've assessed, or given the employees the opportunity to assess their work environment and identify where those needs might be. So that could be done in a combination of maybe those virtual meetings, pushing out assessment tools, and then conversations with the safety help desk Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Okay, any other questions?
Yes. So this question is, can the employee deny or refuse the employer to evaluate their home workspace for safety?
I would think yes. And this is my personal opinion. I think I would definitely work with your legal group if you really wanted to push on that. But OSHA, with OSHA's perspective that the employer doesn't have a right to come into the employee's home office environment, I think that may be a challenge. I think I would probably work with that employee to find out can you complete an assessment without me seeing your area? Have you identified any issues? And then be sure to document that. But I think, from a privacy perspective, you as an employer do need to respect your employees' privacy in their home office.
Okay, the next question, how do you confirm or track the employee compliance with these assessments? What if an employee is not compliant? How do you handle?
Sure. Again, that's going to have to be a survey tool or questionnaire tool, I think. So if you do the computer, say, for example, you did a computer ergonomics assessment and you determined that, they should be sitting at a desk with a separate, with a detachable keyboard, for their, or, an external keyboard for their laptop and the monitor. You go through the assessment, you provide all the recommendations, and then they end up sitting on the floor and doing that. Really, you need to have some type of a questionnaire or affirmation statement from the employee that says, I'm following recommended practices for computer ergonomics in my home. And it's, again, it would be a documentation scenario. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Have you seen any data on an increase in workers' comp claims as a result of the shift to home office work?
Not yet. I've been checking. I have not seen any new data, but I think we probably will start to see that before the end of the year. Yeah. That's something that I've been trying to track, and it's just, there's just nothing out there right now that I've been able to find.
Okay, thank you. How do I balance employee privacy with the need to do home office ergonomics and hazard assessments? I think you touched on that, but maybe you can continue.
Yeah. Yeah, and it may go to the policies, depending on where you are and how remote your employees are. You may want to consider doing an administrative policy that says, look, if you're going to be working from home, here is our policy. You need to follow good ergonomics and, some type of a remote employee agreement. You as the employer are going to do the best to your ability to, use the right equipment, the right workstation setup, those sorts of things to really encourage them to do that. And maybe that becomes a remote agreement with the employee would be one suggestion. Again, it's, you need to be very, very careful with the privacy concerns as well. So, I think I would start there.
Okay. So this question is, are there any seasonal risks we should consider as winter is approaching?
Yeah, sure. I think I touched on that just a little bit with the fire safety. So, again, keeping candles, fires, keeping materials away from that. I would, maybe encourage employees if they're shoveling shoveling front porches and those sorts, driveways and that sort of thing. Spend some time discussing cold hazards with employees. One of Skillsoft's most used courses every year is heat stress. So, as we move into next year, you may want to do cold stress training now and provide them some information on that, and then next year focus on heat stress. So, look at it from a seasonal perspective, how to work safely, doing some of those other tasks that they, might not normally do because they're now working from home. I think that's a great question.
Okay, so this question, if an employee works in a commercial satellite facility that is not owned by a company, do you think full OSHA compliance is needed?
commercial satellite facility. I guess I don't understand enough. I'm thinking two different directions. One is is it a commercial office environment that they've leased space in, employees leasing the space themselves, or is the employer providing the space? Or are we talking about a very technical installation, you know, for something else? I guess I would need some more information.
Okay. This question is, are there any websites that are good resources to learn more?
Yes, OSHA, federal OSHA has some great information. ASSP also has been publishing a lot of good information about home office environments. So if you're a member of ASSP, it's not an endorsement on my part. I'm just saying it's a good reference. And then I think the National Safety Council also has some resources as well. Skillsoft has some courses, just to sort of plug our e-learning, but we do have some e-learning courses and tools that you know, would also be good in creating home office training programs.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank our presenter today, Donna McEntee, and our sponsor, Skillsoft. And on behalf of EHS Today, have a productive remainder of the day.
Great. Thanks, everybody.